Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michael Guerrero, Senior Vice President of New Jersey Hospital Association Healthcare Business Solutions. Welcome to our webinar today, which will focus on medical device cybersecurity with our NJHA strategic partner, Sensata Cybersecurity Solutions. As you know, medical device security is an area of extreme concern for healthcare. It's estimated as many as 60% of medical devices in a single hospital are vulnerable and end-of-line operating systems. We hope you enjoy and find this presentation valuable in recording today's session. I'd turn the presentation over to our presenter, John Gomez, CEO of Sensata and Director of the Medical Device Cybersecurity Task Force. John?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Do truly appreciate everybody taking time to spend with us this afternoon. I'm going to do everything I can to give you back some of your time. I know this is a scheduled about an hour presentation, but if there's anything I can do to kind of give you some time, I will. We certainly will be open to taking questions at the end of the presentation, so if there's something that comes up that you'd like to go into deeper, I'm more than happy to answer that and give you greater insights where possible. The other I'm hoping to do is that we can have some fun along the way, although this is a very serious topic. There are some things that I hopefully will give you a little bit of a chuckle and kind of reduce the anxiety and fear associated with medical device cybersecurity. Let's get into the presentation and kind of started. So just a little bit about us. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I don't want it to be a sales pitch to you, but I do want to qualify who you're listening to if you haven't worked with us or know of us in the past. As Mike said, we are partners with NJHA. And one of our responsibilities in that partnership is to work with NJHA to bring you topical information that we hope you can into action, and that is certainly the goal for today. Sensata was founded in 2013. We've twice been named top 500 most innovative cybersecurity firms in the world. We also have been named a leader in cybersecurity by Frost & Sullivan. We did start, as I mentioned, a medical device cybersecurity task force. I will speak a little bit more about that as we go on. Won't talk a little too about what makes our company different. We do have a purpose that we believe in very strongly, and that is to stand between good and evil. And the team that we've assembled is what I believe to be rather different than most cybersecurity teams are assembled. Their background is somewhat unique, mostly coming out of either military, intelligence community, and some other areas that I think make us a little bit unique. Our objective is always to be an attacker's perspective, so much of what you're going to hear today is really from an attacker's perspective, which we think adds value to the decisions you'll need to make and the strategies you want to embrace when it comes to medical device security. As a company, we have three different lines of business: advisory services. We do a lot of incident response planning, pen testing, vulnerability assessments, tabletop exercises. We do run a security operations center here in New Jersey, and we do have honeypots and breach detection software that we have developed organically and released. And we'll now be announcing the formation of an ISAL, which we'll talk a little bit more specific to medical device and HIV. A variety of partners that we work with day to day. Some of those we'll share with you so that you have a better insight into the information we're providing you. So I'm not going to spend too much on this. Like I said, I really want to focus on the content of what we do and give you kind of the most value for your time with us today. These are just some photos of our Security Operations Center and our Nightingale product. With that, I really get into the core and the crux of today's presentation and share with you as much information as possible. And hopefully you'll have questions, because I think the greatest value comes from our ability to interact with you, even if it's virtually, and give you as much feedback and suggestions as we can. And so I want to talk a little bit about kind of academic background, if you will. What makes it hopefully valuable for you to listen to me and the information we have to share with you. Like mentioned, we did found the Medical Device Cybersecurity Task Force back in 2016, and we started with about 3 or 4 members. We're now at around 80, 83 members. That's of different organizations, hospitals such as Children's Hospital of Atlanta, Dow Children's, BB Healthcare, and others, as medical device manufacturers like Olympus, consultancies like KPMG. So the task force's job or responsibility is to really come up with best practices to secure medical devices. So we also, part of the task force is MITRE. For those of you that don't know who MITRE is, MITRE is the research, government research group that does all of the advanced research for things like FDA, NSA, Department of Defense, and FAA, and a variety of others. FDA, back in 2016, assigned MITRE to the Medical Device Task Force. Task Force is open source. Any of you can join. There's a fee to join. And so if you want to join, you can go to mdctf.org and get you further details. Because of that task force, we have been working very closely with MITRE and FDA. And a lot of the information you're going to be hearing today has been shared with FDA and MITRE, and they've also been partly responsible for helping guide us and making sure that what we tell you is accurate. That said, there's always going to be a chance that we'll provide you with maybe something that isn't exactly appropriate for your organization. And so we do encourage you to think about this in the context of your organization and not just holistically what's right for everybody. Creating an ISAO, that Information Sharing and Analysis Organization, will be signing a Memorandum of Understanding with the FDA. And the focus of this ISAO initially will be around medical device security. We'll be working with medical device vendors and healthcare providers, help them share vulnerability information back and forth. So if there is a device issue, a vulnerability within a device, you'll be able to be notified very quickly and be told about that. You will also get information and access to bill of materials, vendor assessments, and a bunch of other information. But that will be an ISAO that also will be connected to Department of Homeland Security and to NHISAC. The idea here is that we start creating an ecosystem between these organizations where information, tactics, and support can be provided for members throughout the ISAO and the greater ecosystem. As an organization, as Sensato, we have delivered a large amount of medical device assessments, and a lot of what we're going to share with you today comes from doing medical device assessments for healthcare organizations in New Jersey and throughout the United States. We also work with medical device manufacturers, so we have developed programs, training programs, writing secure code programs. We've done testing of medical devices in our labs on behalf of the medical device manufacturers. So we're not just looking at this from a care provider perspective, regulatory perspective, but also the medical device manufacturer's perspective. And so happy to hear more about what we've learned there. I have done incident response and forensic analysis of medical devices, so we have a pretty good understanding of what happens when one of these things gets attacked or when there's a suspicion of an attack. We could talk a little bit about that. And we also have, as part of our work with MDCTF, create a medical device cybersecurity policy. We found that many times organizations don't have their own policies, so we have a boilerplate policy for organizations. We've actually shared with FDA and MITRE and DHS. We also created a vendor assessment framework, and we'll talk a little more about this, but the vendor assessment framework is basically a spreadsheet of 120 questions across a variety of different control areas specific to medical devices that help you qualify vendor's medical device in terms of risk or security risk before you actually purchase it. That's also something we've done and shared with FDA and others. And we'll talk more about those. But the idea here is I wanted to make sure that you know, if you're wondering why listen to me, what all qualifies me to talk about this topic, I wanted to give you some background on what we've done and where we've spent some of our time as an organization and as individuals. Get deeper into kind of some of the lessons learned. There are some common myths that we come across, and I wanted to share here with you because I think they have compliance and regulatory implications for your organization, and I will explain kind of where those regulatory and compliance implications come in. So this is something that I think can do you a lot of harm if you believe in these myths or if you don't quite clearly understand what these myths imply. The thing we hear, and often whether it's us or FDA, is the FDA is the only group responsible for medical device cybersecurity, and that is completely not true. The FDA is one group that is responsible for medical device cybersecurity, but actually regulations that come out and guidance and controls that are partly from OCR or HIPAA. Medical devices, in many cases, if not all, do maintain PHI and PII, and some of them even PCI data. And because of that, any regulation related to that also affects medical devices. And often we'll think of that, and I, hear often from organizations, well, the medical device group is a different department. It's not part of the IT organization. We do HIPAA stuff for our EMRs and our applications. Unfortunately, you have a regulatory responsibility to do the same things that you do for HIPAA on the application side of the house and the network side of the house for the medical device side of the organization. So AA is one, OCR is another. And then there's Department of Homeland Security. Now, Department of Homeland Security doesn't have any clear regulations per se that we know of, maybe wrong on this, but as far as we know, they don't have any regulations or rules of medical devices, but they can certainly impact medical device security from the standpoint of not only best practices, but from a national security perspective. I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. The organization that's not on this chart that does impact medical devices, if there's PI on it, is oversee PCI enforcement. So you have to understand that if a medical device, for some reason, is capturing charge information or some type of credit financial information, you could also be impacted by PCI regulations on the medical devices. So the takeaway here is that a lot more complications than we probably originally associate with medical devices just from who's managing the oversight of these things. But the bottom myth here is that it's not just FDA, even though we think that FDA is the only group that really has any control of them. Cybersecurity for medical devices is optional. We hear that often, and it stems from the next myth. But the life is that you have to address all risks on medical devices, and cybersecurity is a risk. So if you have cybersecurity risks in the medical devices, you must address them just like you would any other part of the organization that comes under a compliance or regulatory framework. All this, like I said, comes from this notion that, well, you can't update medical devices. They can't be patched. So because we can't do anything about it. And that's true. You can patch medical devices. Device manufacturers can issue patches for cybersecurity, and in many cases do not have to go back through a review process with FDA, especially in those situations where someone's life has been impacted or could be impacted because of a vulnerability. And this is important for you to understand because it gives you tremendous leverage with your medical device manufacturers. And we have been called in many times where somebody said, hey, we know there's a vulnerability. We've contacted the medical device manufacturer and telling us, well, there's nothing they can do, or if we want, we got to go to the new version of the product or whatever it is. And reality of life is that you have, if they're telling you that, well, it would take too long, FDA is going to have to review it, chances are FDA is not going to have to review it. They can issue a patch, and they can help manage and mitigate that risk. Now, there are some exceptions to this. But they're small exceptions, or I should say statistically small exceptions, right? You're not going to have, those cases, 5% of them are going to require FDA review, but a large majority can be patched without that. Now, the other option is end-of-life operating systems, and I'll talk about those more in a little bit. I just want to get through this notion of, well, if we patch it, we'll be, the vendor will catch it or whatever it is. It's a myth, and I can talk more about that a little bit later. You as the healthcare organization can issue a patch. I wouldn't recommend doing that, but just to be fair to this myth, you could. If you want to patch, your medical device, you can do that, especially in the area of cybersecurity and especially if it impacts life. I would probably not recommend you doing that, and so I want to separate the myth from fact and from the recommendation. You should be aware of the fact that an organization can patch one of these for security purposes. Again, I probably wouldn't recommend it. The other last myth here is that the FDA tests medical devices for cybersecurity, and that is not true. They require that the manufacturer demonstrate that they've addressed all risks related to a device as part of the review process. but the FDA is not bringing these devices in and putting them through a battery of tests and testing them and seeing if that's done. Interestingly enough, that is something we are talking to FDA about. A part of our ISAL, one of the things we as a company are introducing is this concept of a cyber range. So you as an organization can come here to our facilities in New Jersey and spend a couple days with us and go through real live attacks. These aren't tabletop simulations. This is actually being attacked for real. What we've been learning is that we can bring medical devices into this environment and test them for their resiliency against devices, against attacks. So we're looking at how can we work with FDA to make that requirement for medical devices in the future that they must go through some type of cyber range or resiliency program. So we'll see where that goes. But for right now, you know, all testing of medical devices in terms of their security is something the medical device manufacturer is responsible for. One of the key reasons that you as the healthcare organization need to do an evaluation of these devices from a risk perspective before they ever come into your hospital. And I'll talk to you a little more about that in a moment. So let's talk a little bit about the traditional way that we've been seeing over the past 2 to 3 years that people have evaluated medical devices. And so what we see is typically us or some other firm will be called in to do an assessment. And we will do an assessment of the medical devices on the network, check them for a variety of things. We'll look at security controls. We'll look at policy. We'll do vulnerability assessments. And then we'll produce a bunch of results and a bunch of recommendations. Now, what we found about 5, 6 months ago is that often the organization is going, okay, so now I know all this, but what can I do? And unfortunately, what we're finding is too many organizations are spending money to these medical device assessments when answers are always going to be the same. And if you hire us or hire a competitor or whoever it is, or if you have somebody come in and do a medical device assessment, there's a 95% chance that the results and the recommendations are going to be the same every time. Unfortunately, that's going to run you about $20,000 to $35,000 to do that assessment. Again, you can shop it around, maybe get a little bit better price, a little worse price, whatever it may be. Unfortunately, though, regardless of what you spend, you're going to come up with the same results and recommendations. Thinking to Mike and NJHA, we kind of came to epiphany about, like, well, why just tell people the answers from the get-go and stop and invest in these assessments? Because it's kind of a waste of money, to be frank. And so what we're kind of doing today is sharing with you, well, what are the results and the recommendations so that you can kind of jump to the front of the line and about what to do. Fine, right? I tell you that I don't care what manufacturers you have, what mix devices, we'll find that on average a device has about 6.2 vulnerabilities. Now, some will be 0, some will be higher, so this is an average, and easy to do the math, right? If you guys have 1,000 devices in your hospital, you only have 6,200 vulnerabilities when it comes to medical devices. You got more devices, you can use that times 6.2. It's probably around the amount of medical vulnerabilities that you have. We found 59 to 60% of the end of life, meaning they're running Windows XP, Windows CE, or some other operating system. In these cases, there's much you can do. Even if you want to patch, obviously, Microsoft or whoever the vendor is not producing any new patches for those. You're pretty much some situation, you know, there's not much you can do with that population. And again, your mileage may vary, but probably if you did an inventory assessment of your operating systems for medical devices, you'd find you're going to somewhere between 40 and 70% of your devices are running end-of-life operating systems. Again, we find this over and over. So you can't afford to upgrade or patch the devices. We hear that a lot. Like, great, now you've told me that 40 to 70 or on average 59% of my devices are end-of-life and have 6.2 vulnerabilities, but I can't afford to patch them, and I can't throw them out and buy new ones. So what do I do? So those are the kind of mechanics, if you will, right? We find this all the time. Actually, it puts you in a position where now you know you've got issues, but you really can't do much because economically it's not feasible. You know, if you the finance department, you're probably utilizing these devices over a 20-year period in some cases, and some are millions of dollars of investments. So you turn around and swap, and the vendors can't just give you replacements. It wouldn't be economically feasible for their businesses. All right, so the mechanics. On the operating side of this, we also see that there's a lack of policies, processes, or procedures specific to medical device cybersecurity. And I think this happens a lot because we see this gray area. The IT team is saying, hey, IT security, and we have policies, and the compliance department has got HIPAA, but there's nobody that's kind of come along and said, hey, here's what the policies need to be for medical devices. And the medical device teams, with all due respect, I don't think, are thinking, wow, we've got to have a medical device cybersecurity policy. They have other policies around firmware management, patch updates, and other things, but not specific to cybersecurity. So this area that we often, 85% of the cases where we do an assessment, find that this is missing. We also find that when it comes to incident response, the overall maturity and capability of the organization to respond to a medical device attack, if somebody went after the devices themselves, is probably not as mature as we need it to be in the threats that we're facing today. In many cases, incident response plans don't even address medical device attacks. And so that's another area that we continually find as one of the problems. And then medical device security awareness training, really understanding the threats, the current threat landscape, the implications around security, what you should be looking for, what should you be considering when your vendor community is not there. And we also find no vendor assessment program. And so, like I said earlier, you can pretty much hire anybody you want. They're going to come and do the assessment, charge you, but this is what they're going to find. Now, the next question becomes, okay, well, this is what you found. What do we do about it? And so we typically have the same recommendations that we, in terms of what to do for the organizations that we meet with, or even if it's a competitor, you'll probably get the same recommendations. They word it differently. They might put it up or make it worse looking than we do, but ultimately, honestly, it'll probably be the same thing. So what are those recommendations? Well, this is what you're going to be told. Now, I've obviously truncated this to fit it into the time we have allowed, but more than likely the recommendations at a lower high level are going to be that we need to institute specific process and policy, or what we call PTP, tactics, techniques, and procedures for medical devices. You have to have written cybersecurity policies for these devices. What they're going to hear is segregate the devices, that you get them on their own network. I'll talk more about that in a moment. Particularly when I mention this, or when somebody mentions it, everybody freaks out because this is not easy to do, and it's a very costly this in many cases. Monitoring the devices is one thing that we also find a lot. There's no monitoring in place for any of the devices. So even if you have a segregated network, there's monitoring on that network, and often that's because of one of two reasons. One, that network is being run or operated by the medical device engineering group, or two, we do this a lot, is that the manufacturer has deployed a network, and IT didn't even know about it. Some of you will say, oh, no, not in my hospital. I would ask that if you have GE, Philips, and there's some that you probably go check and see if there's networks that have been deployed that you don't know about. I'll tell you from our Security Operations Center, when we're monitoring clients, we will sometimes see reverse shells established. Reverse shells will send information outbound to European organizations. Getting too specific, when we investigate that, because that sets off all kinds of alarms, as you can imagine, we find out that, oh, it's nefarious in terms of an attacker, but it's rather the medical device manufacturer has deployed a PC that provides a reverse shell so the support organization can tunnel and do whatever they need to do. The weird part about that is when I say a reverse shell, they're really using malware do this, and it's not, it's just, I'll explain more about it later. My point is, you got to have monitoring on these networks and for these devices specifically for a lot of reasons. You need to get an evolve and replace strategy in place. So not be able to replace all these end-of-life devices over, or even in the next 3 to 5 years, but a insurance perspective, OCR perspective, and liability perspective, it's important that you have some kind of plan. If you recognize the risk and you acknowledge it, and then say, hey, look, based on our resources, our availability of funding, we can probably replace these things over 5 years or 7 years or whatever it is, they need to acknowledge that we are going to go ahead and measure this risk, and we are dealing with the risk. We may not be able to deal with it overnight, but we have a plan. And that's probably one of the most important things for you to take away is, even if you can't do all this, get the plans in place. If you can't segregate your network, then get a plan that, hey, over the next 30 months, we're going to move to these things. And the reason for that is that it's better than the ostrich syndrome of, well, I know that stuff's out there, but we're going to pretend that it isn't, because that always leads to higher fines and higher challenges when it comes to court cases. So the evolve and replace, make sure you have some kind of plan to evolve and replace those end-of-life devices. Threat intelligence and education. All procedures have to be for the current threat landscape. So if you demonstrate that you're getting intelligence and ongoing education, then you're in a position to actually point to the fact that what you're doing is relevant for the threats that you're dealing with today and is not dated or something that comes from 2 or 3 years ago. So those are kind of the key recommendations, and I'm going to talk a little more about them and break them out for you in a little bit to kind of give you a different slant on them. So this is the same exact recommendations you just saw on the last slide. I just kind of cleaned them up and put them into a nice chart. So what I recommend is that you still do some kind of representative assessment. Pick a population of your devices and do a mini assessment around those. Institute some tactics, techniques, and procedures. So you want to deploy a medical device cybersecurity policy and get that in place. Do a vendor assessment framework. Join SAL, so you get the threat intelligence and education. You can join ours, you can join another one. It doesn't really matter, but find a way to get that threat intelligence and education. Aggregation, consider micro-segmentation. I'm going to talk about that in a moment, so I won't go any deeper into it. And monitor the network. Obviously, I'm going to tell you to use our stuff, but however you want to monitor that network is you. We'd love you to use our Nightingale product, which is a honeypot and breach detection system, or our security operations center. But the more important thing is whether you use our products or someone else's, that you have monitoring in place specific to these themselves and the network. And then the evolve and replace I've touched on, which is develop a written plan of how you're going to get rid of those end-of-life devices. And one other thing about that, it's not just when you're going to get rid of them, but how you're going to mitigate and manage that risk as best as possible now and when they're off your network. It's a little bit tougher, but all of the other pieces I gave you here went into that plan. So you could say, hey, we're going to segregate end-of-life devices, we're going to monitor those devices, whatever you want to do, but have some kind of risk mitigation strategy for specific devices. And the strategic recommendations around what we find, right? So I kind of gave you what we find when we do an assessment, and give kind of the results and recommendations. And if we were brought in, this is the briefing we would give your executives, and this is the briefing we'd give your technical teams. There might be a few things here that we find in your specific case that do apply, or some other things that do apply, but I would suspect that for the majority of people listening to this presentation, you're probably going to think, yeah, that's probably the stuff that we would hear or we have heard in the past. So the reason for doing this, like I said, Mike Ruggiero and I had this discussion on why are we charging people for things that we kind of already know the answers for. So we're hoping the value from this is that gives you kind of the ability to jump forward. So a little bit about segmentation, because when we talk network segmentation or segregation of devices, we often hear that, oh, it's too expensive, too difficult, can't do it. Please understand, there's a way to do this in micro-segmentation format that does save you some money, is not as cumbersome or as difficult as if you segregate the entire network, especially if you're completely flat. And so take a crawl, walk, run approach. You can do it physically or virtually. If you're going to do it either way, you need to have at least a firewall and IDS and some type of monitoring on the segmented network. You can create just a segmented network for your medical devices. Now, we often hear that, okay, we have tons of medical devices. It's going to take us 2 years to break them off the main network and put them onto a segregated. Well, that's okay, as long as you have a plan. Because what you don't want to create is a situation where you say, we know we should do it, but we just can't. Because it ain't going to go well if you ever get deposed. I mean, think about an attorney standing in front of you saying, so you did know you were supposed to segregate. Well, yes, we did. And why didn't you do this? Well, we just couldn't do it. Well, what do you mean you couldn't do it? Well, we had a lot going on. Well, you have something more important going on than medical device cybersecurity. Is that what you're saying, sir or ma'am? That's probably the place to be. So try a plan in place, even if it's going to take you 2 years or 3 years, that demonstrates that, yes, we're doing it and we're doing the best we can. Now, here's a little tip. If you look at this graphic on the screen, if you all your devices, at least say, hey, phase 1 is going to be to move all our critical devices to one segmented network, right? Those things that if somebody got to them and did something to them, could potentially create patient safety issues, immediate patient safety issues. They could either stop somebody's life, they could create a catastrophic patient situation. Talk to your medical device team, talk to your clinicians, figure out what those devices are, and then move those. And you just do that over a 12-month period. And your response then would be, hey, we've got life-critical devices segmented, and we know we've got more to do, but we took care of that. That was our highest priority. And it's a much better place to be than it's really hard and we can't afford to do it. I'm trying to say, and look, we're not in the network segmentation business, so we don't, you can't help you with this. We're not trying to throw on anything, just trying to really convince you that it's an important thing to do, especially from a regulatory and compliance perspective. Once you're life critical, then consider your diagnostic devices, because there's probably a lot more of those, and then you can start maybe chunking those up and moving them to a segmented network, and then likely anything else that's left of the medical device category. Best practices, if you can have 3 segmented networks for medical devices, one for just your life critical, one just diagnostic, and one for other. And so this paradigm that I'm presenting to you helps facilitate that best practice. It also allows you to take a crawl, walk, run approach over a period of time to get to this level of maturity. That's kind of the piece on segmentation, and just wanted to touch on it because, again, I know it's hard, know a lot's going on. Please don't take anything I'm saying as being arrogant or disrespectful of what you guys have to deal with day to day. It's not something I would want to deal with day to day. I truly appreciate that challenge. That said, and hopefully some of this will be a little fun for you and a little opening. So you have all of that that I just presented, and that's probably more than enough anybody wants to know or deal with. But there's other kind of thing that's starting to rear its ugly little head. And I tell you this because you're going to be the first ones we presented this to. And I think it's cool. It's not be cool for you maybe, but I think it's kind of cool. So as a company, we tend to do a lot of research and thinking, and we think about cyber munitions and cyber war and artificial intelligence and automated countermeasures and all kind of cool stuff. And one area that we think about is quantum computing. And so I just attended a conference out in DC over the past week or two, and quantum computing and blockchain security were a big deal. We're issuing some white papers and videos on those topics. But when we're talking about quantum computing, it really got very interesting, and I want to share with you some of the research we've done. And so all this is public, and so just want to give you some context. So we all know encryption is a way to safeguard stuff. Kind of have mixed feelings on encryption because I think it creates a false sense of security, but that's a topic for another day. Anyways, the strongest encryption we have today is around 2048. Now, the thing with encryption, I think everybody, I hope or understands, is that really, it's a bet. Right? Encryption isn't truly secure. We're just betting that the processing power we have doesn't allow somebody to discover the keys, right? I mean, that's all we're doing, and that's why I say it's kind of a false sense of security. Encryption isn't really truly the secure lock. It's just, hey, until we have, we're good enough for now because nobody has enough computing power to figure out how to break the encryption. So if I wanted to brute force encryption, this is what I do, right? I start with all zeros, and then I write a computer program, right? I start with all zeros, I change 1 0 to 1, I keep moving that, and you can see as each box goes, I keep progressing, and then I do 2 zeros until eventually the lock opens. Same as if I was picking a door lock, I kind of move the tumblers until I get them all in the right place, and then the door is unlocked. It's very much the same way to break, right? I create an algorithm that just kind of walks through the sequence. And this is what I mean that really what we're betting on is that the encryption key is long enough that it would take a very long time to figure out your key before I could break the lock. And it's kind of interesting. If I have 56-bit encryption, I can break that using these processors in about 400 seconds. So, 4 or 5 minutes or so, a bit longer, maybe 10 minutes, I guess. As the encryption goes up, you can see that it exponentially grows in terms of the amount of time that it takes to break that encryption. And it's longer and longer. And again, here's that bet, right? I'm just betting that if you're going to try and break 256 encryption, that you're not going to have the computing power to break that in any reasonable period of time. Let me put this into some kind of cool game for you. So let's assume that everybody on the planet, every human being, had 10 computers, and we strung them all together. About 7 billion people on the planet, a little bit more. Each of these computers, for our purposes, can test 1 billion key combinations. And so that means that, on average, you can crack the key after testing about 50% of the total combinations, right? So computers on the planet all at one time is trying to lend 10 computers to go break somebody's encryption key. And this would take, I don't even know what number that is, but if we tried to break encryption we know today, it would take that long, to 77 billion years, right? A long, long time. None of us would be around. Our kids, children's children wouldn't be around by the time this computer program stopped running and found the key. So all well and good, and this is the backbone of encryption. It's important to understand that. Now, here's the other little gotcha. Medical devices typically rely on some form of encryption, especially for transmission of patient data or patient information. So it depends on the device and what they're doing, but typically we see 256, but be higher or lower depending on what we're doing. Now, let's quantum computing. So quantum computing, I'm not going to get deep into this, but if we had a quantum computer and we had the same exact algorithm on a single quantum computer and try to break the encryption, our best encryption we have today, it would take about 110 seconds. So the problem here is kind of the aha moment that we're entering an age where medical device encryption, let alone every other type of encryption we know, is quickly going to become outdated. These pictures are of actual quantum computers. So this isn't something that's 10 years away. Google has a quantum computer. The top left there is a Microsoft quantum computer. On the right is IBM's. You guys can actually go on any of the websites for these companies and play around with these quantum computers. There's a new language Microsoft has released called Q# that allows you to write quantum algorithms, and I've been playing around with that. And so we've gone from a world where it's going to take 1 billion years to more to break encryption to a world where in the very near future we probably could break encryption within 100 to 200 seconds. Now, what's the implication of medical devices? Why am I telling you this? Aside from it's kind of hopefully fascinating. The NSA, National Security Administration, has advised, because of quantum computing and the verge of what we're seeing on the horizon in the very short term, that all vendors doing business with the federal government must begin using quantum-resistive algorithms and approaches in their programs. And this is really important, right? Because what the NSA is saying is, hey, look, we believe this is going to be very real. We realize the implications to today's encryption standards. And since we buy technology, when the NSA buys something, they're usually buying it for 10 or 15 or 20 years before they get something new. They need to make sure that what they're buying today is going to be able to stand up to a quantum computer hack. The reason I'm telling you that is because medical devices are typically bought for 10, 15, 20 years. So there's a chance that the medical devices you buy in the next year to two will eventually be in a situation where quantum hacks will affect them, and their encryption and their other security strengths won't be able to support or protect you. There won't be a patch for them. We are actually going to be preparing a briefing for the FDA on the impact of quantum computing to medical devices. We're sharing this with you guys today first. We really haven't shared it with anyone else. But you really need to think about the economic and security implications. Now, is this something that should be running around, the sky is falling, Y2K is back? No. But as you think about your medical device purchasing strategy and your vendor assessments, it's more important now than ever to really think about, well, what is vendor doing and how are they going to protect me from a cybersecurity perspective over the next 10 to 20 years? And that's really what I'm trying to illustrate. When we're buying these devices, it's a little different than anything else we buy in a hospital for the most part. Because buying things that we can replace every 2 to 3 years, or if encryption changes or the operating system is new, we can swap things out. So it's something to really consider and think about more from a philosophical point, but this is going to become real, and as you can see, NSA has already kind of taken the first step. And if you're more interested, I'm happy to share details, but I just wanted to kind of give you that perspective. So we're going to open it up for questions in a moment. I want to tell you a little bit about what we're doing. We've come out with a package in partnership with Comply Assistant called MDCop. It basically takes everything we just told you, puts it in one package. So it lets you do an assessment of up to 100 medical devices, which is your representative population. We give you the pre-written cybersecurity policy. We've written one. We give the vendor assessment framework. You get membership in the ISAL. We do 12 hours of best practice consulting around segmentation. We add your medical devices to our security operations center, and we deploy a Nightingale product that we've developed. And with that program, I can tell you MDCop itself is about the same price as doing just a medical device assessment and then being told, hey, you got to go do all this stuff, now go pay for that. So we've kind of worked really hard to put together a package that is for NJHA members. It saves money because now you don't have to pay for the assessment and go get the answers later on. You can just jump to the end of the line and your investment a little bit more wisely. It's about $35,000, depends on how we finalize it for MDCop. And Comply Assistant is integrated their platform with the offering so that you can manage the vendor risk assessments. It does add some cost to this product. But it manages those 120 questions, and it does it in a managed service. So you don't have to have the resources in your organization. Comply Assistant's actually doing the risk auditing of all your medical device vendors and doing that not only in an automated fashion, but they actually have humans who are reviewing the answers and able to score those. And so that information also gets shared and is integrated with the ISAL. So it's a very ecosystem approach, holistic approach to how we're trying to do this. But I don't spend too much time on that, but to at least let you know that it's available. We talked about the ISAL, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. So with that, that's kind of everything I have. I hope you have some questions. I hope I gave you something of value and that you kind of walk away with at least some type of prescriptive approach to what you want to do next or do over the next several months. But with that, if we have questions, I'm happy to take them.
If you'd like to ask a question, you can raise your hand, and we will unmute you so that you can ask it directly, or you can also type your question into the chat room. I do have a question, and it says, I know why you recommend segregation and that it is important, but is it really that critical, or is there another alternative?
I think it is rather critical, and I'm not sure, you know, there's another alternative. To be honest, I would say you'd have to check with your network engineering teams or specialists or network architect, rather. I do think it is critical from a couple of different perspectives. It's not just the technology. I think times we get too caught up on, oh, well, the tech side of this. There's also, you got to think about how you're positioning yourself if something were to happen and there's either a civil lawsuit brought against you, a regulatory investigation is brought against you. You got to be able to say, yes, we evaluated this, and we decided to do it because of this, or we decided not to do it because of that. And it's important now more than ever to really kind of make sure that when you're making these decisions on your architecture and your defenses and your security responses, that you have your legal team and your finance team weigh out post-event what risk they're willing to take. I don't know if I'm answering it clearly. What I want to get through to everybody is don't think about this in terms of the tech, because they're long gone. You have to think about these things as, what do we feel like if we're dragged into a courtroom and somebody asks my network administrator, well, why don't you do segmentation? And if the answer is, well, because I just didn't think we had the time, that's what your chief counsel really wants put on the stand. And is that that you want in the newspaper the next morning? The hospital didn't have time for network segmentation, attackers ran amok. Probably not. I guess I'm not trying to be funny, and I'm trying to be really respectful, so I apologize for the long-winded answer. But just to kind of think about this from a different perspective than just the technology and the challenges that it presents. Sorry.
Okay, we have a question from Laura Sturm. Go ahead, Laura.
I was wondering, will we have access to this presentation after the WebEx?
Being recorded, and we can see the slides as well. So, yes,
Great.
Use it however you wish. So that'd be great.
And do you think this ISAO will be, when will we be able to join? Because myself and the management team at our organization have been do that. We've been looking for that to join ISAO for about a year and a half now.
Waiting right now on FDA. We're told that they're going to have the memorandum of understanding to us at the end of this week, which means next week. But I'm assuming that in the next 4 to 6 weeks we will do that. What we can do is try to work with NJHA and announce it so that you guys will all get that announcement once it's official and how to join and all of that.
We will start. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
A couple more questions. Why should we use your vendor assessment framework as opposed to some of the others?
So a couple, there are a bunch out there and it's starting to get a little confusing. I would tell you, hey, net, use somebody's. What I will tell you with the one we did is it was built by Medical Device Cybersecurity Task Force, so it's been vetted by several hospitals, but it's also been vetted by medical device manufacturers. And what they're trying to do is standardize on a framework so that they're able to provide you with the information before you need to even ask for it. The other thing is that it's an open source framework, so if there's questions you want to add, evolve that framework and kind of grow it. So that's the reasons we would use it, and we've also presented it to FDA. They were pretty impressed with it, so we've had a lot of time to really vet it and ensure that it's pretty comprehensive for a variety of different things. And then, again, like I said, it's integrated with Comply Assistant if you're using their product. So we think there's a lot of reasons to use it, but if yours, use someone's.
Okay, then. Have any direct cybersecurity attacks against medical devices that you know of?
So that's a hard question to answer. There has been, you know of, and this is where DHS gets involved. We have seen that when that's occurred, some of these things have been designated national security, and so then they don't kind of go any, the information doesn't go much further. I've also seen accidental attacks. Other organizations have been trying to do the right thing. And so, for example, they deployed, we know of one instance where antivirus was deployed to medical devices and locked up during an operation because the devices tried to update the antivirus and that didn't go too well. We have seen attacks. Most of them get classified pretty quickly if there's anything that is serious about them. Also, we did see that some medical device attacks occurred during the last, I think it was WannaCry and Petya attacks. They weren't directed at medical devices. They fell victim to those attacks because they were on the same network as everything else in the hospital.
John, is the 120 risk assessment questionnaire available at this moment prior to membership to ISAO?
We can give you that as just because you're part of NJHA and we have responsibility to do good things with that membership. So yes, if you guys want it, let us know, NJHA know, and we'll get you. It's a suite, just so you know. It's not audited in any way, but we're happy to get you that spreadsheet, and you can review it and look at it.
You can call in, though. You didn't call in.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. John, thank you for a great presentation. Thank you, NJHA members, and I will be back in touch with you with the actual webinar recording as well as the slides. Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.